Hello everyone, it is Aussies back. Finally, I hope you guys had a good long weekend, a good Australia Day. Now that we have a news poll pointing to a 51-49 lead to the coalition, I am back to make a video about the possibility that Peter Dutton and the Liberal National Coalition will form a majority government. How could it happen? Most people are pointing to a minority government at the moment as the most likely situation. I also believe it's the most likely situation. Whether it's a Labour minority government or a coalition minority government, I'm not too sure. But today I'll be looking at a hypothetical about how the coalition, if they were to form majority government, what would be their most likely path to do it. Now, I'm also playing on extra hard mode today, and by that I mean I am assuming that the coalition do not win any seats they lost to the Teals last election. So a lot of people talked about how Peter Dutton is aiming for a sort of a change of demographic appeal, aiming to a different set of voters, and that's kind of what I'm looking at today. How can Dutton win the election without winning Teal seat? We'll go straight onto the map. This is actually the YAPMS map that we're using today, not my typical map. First reason is we're only dealing with the House of Representatives. Secondly is they've updated the boundaries on the YAPMS map. So these are actual accurate boundaries. So this was very recent when they did this. And it's also this map I can sort of zoom in and out of it, and I can change the colors so that the colors aren't all just one or two colors. And some people have been complaining about on my own map how the squares are too small and stuff like that. So yeah, tell me if you prefer this or not, if you prefer my own map. But we're using the YAPMS map today. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with sort of the least consequential states moving towards the most consequential states, starting with South Australia. I'm not going to look at the regional seats because nothing's happening there. But I'm also suspecting that in South Australia that we're not going to see any change. And I think it's quite unlikely that the coalition will win Boothby. No MRP has pointed to the coalition winning Boothby, and I don't think it's even been close. I think the smallest margin has been 53-47. And I don't think it's the kind of seat that would really move towards the coalition. The coalition are looking at outer suburban or peri-suburban or, sort of half suburban, half regional seats as their targets. Boothby is not quite an inner city seat. It's definitely a metro seat, quite close to the city. There's a lot of sort of new money. I would describe in Boothby, house prices have gone up a lot. I guess you could say rents have also gone up a lot. And I think there will be a swing against the Labour Party probably for the rental crisis. I think it's unlikely that seat is going to change hands, even though the margin is quite small. And another reason is because Boothby is in South Australia, and I don't think the swing is on much in South Australia. Here it says 2.3%, but I think actually this might be overstated in a stronger than actual preference flow from One Nation. As you can see here, the One Nation vote is up in South Australia quite a bit. So I actually don't think the swing is going to be this high in South Australia. I don't think the two-party preferred is going to be this close in South Australia, in my opinion. But what I will say is that the coalition will win one of either Boothby in South Australia or Tangney in Western Australia. So Tangney's over here. In a way, they're sort of similar seats. They're sort of definitely on the sort of more wealthier side of town. They're definitely sort of a bit more progressive than, seats that you might find in sort of the outer suburbs. But they both have similar margins. The difference is that with Tangney, it's a seat that really Labour won out of a surprise at the last election. It's not a seat that you would expect to go to Labour. I believe prior to that election, it had something like a 10 or 11% margin. So MRP is pointing to Tangney as a win back for the coalition. I think that they will likely win it back on a very small margin, maybe between 0.5 and 1%. More, which is currently held by an independent, which is Ian Goodenough. He has left the party. I believe that the coalition will win that seat back. And then, of course, as I promised, I will not be counting Teal seats as possible gains for the coalition. I'm not saying Teal seats can't be gained by the coalition, but this is sort of like an experiment. A lot of people are saying that Curtin is the most likely one to go to the coalition. My vibe is that all of these Teal seats will actually overperform what everybody's thinking. I think they'll all get re-elected. They'll do pretty well. But we are talking here on a hypothetical where the coalition get quite a big two-party preferred national swing, and maybe those Teal seats will be threatened if we're talking this hypothetical. But yeah, as an experiment, no Teal changes. We're keeping the Teals as they are. Now, Bullwinkle That's a seat that pretty much everybody's expecting will go to the coalition. It's currently a notional Labour seat. Whether it'll go to the National Party or the Liberal Party, that's up to an argument. I believe that there's sort of like a high profile national running who's like currently like a state member or something like that. So yeah, so I'm going to give Bullwinkle and Tankney to the coalition. But that's all to say about South Australia and Western Australia. Now going up to the Northern Territory. So Lingiari. I believe the last couple of MRPs have pointed to the coalition winning Lingiari. It's on a pretty small margin. When it comes to the state election, there wasn't as big of a swing in Lingiari as there was in sort of the area of Solomon, up in Darwin and Palmerston. But everything's pointing the swing being enough to take the seat off the Labor Party. The margin is very small. So that's one that we're giving to the coalition. So let's go to Queensland, which is almost pretty status quo. I mean, actually, I've got like another version of Brisbane over here. So Ryan, the latest MRP pointed to the Greens retaining all of their seats in Brisbane, but I have so many people who say like the coalition are going to win. Ryan, look at the Brisbane City Council election. Like it's a conservative seat. The Greens won by a fluke last time. The member isn't that popular. Blah 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 blah. So look, I'm going to say that the coalition could win one of two seats off of the Greens in Brisbane, and that is either Brisbane or Ryan. Ryan is probably the more likely one. As apart from that, Queensland, I don't think there's going to be much change. A lot of people talk about Blair. I don't think Blair, even if the coalition did well, I still don't think it's in their sights. Scott Morrison failed to win it back in 2019, his miracle election. They did really well in Queensland in that election. The polls are not pointing to much movement in Queensland. I know the polls usually underestimate the coalition support in Queensland. I think they'll probably do a bit better than people expect. Instead of a 1% swing, they might get a 3 or 4% swing. But Blair is still on a 5.5% margin. It's like the kind of seat that you would expect to go to the coalition. It's like in that area that everyone's talking about, that sort of like outer suburban or sort of half regional seats. Something about the demographics of Blair just save it from going that way. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the MRPs are not pointing to much movement in Blair. So I'm not going to count Blair as a possible suspect. Now, on to Tasmania. So Lions, I suggested in the last video, I think it was, my general prediction, where I thought that like Lions could stay with the Labor Party because like the state government isn't doing too well. There was a poll. But somebody in the comments was like, no, Labor are absolutely screwed in Lions. I mean, the MRP is pointing to that. So I think it would make sense if I did give that to the coalition. It's probably going to go to the coalition Lions. And the betting markets, there's a handful of seats that were released recently, and it has like the coalition as a clear favourites in Lions. So that's one, at least for this experiment, that I'm pretty happy to give to the coalition. Now we get on to the two states of interest. I guess we don't even need to talk about the ACT because nothing's happening there. And that is New South Wales and Victoria. I want to talk about New South Wales first. So the seats that everyone's thinking are like the goners are basically Bennelong and Gilmore and Patterson. Those are the three seats where most people are saying, yeah, it's over for Labor. They're going to lose those seats. The other seat, which is a sort of in the likely column, is Robertson, which is seen as sort of the bellwether seat. And then you have a handful of seats where the most recent MRP is pointing to sort of a nail biter. One of these includes sort of like the inner suburban seat of Reid, which I find quite curious that in the most recent MRP was 50-50. It's not a seat that I would have expected would be swinging that far to the coalition. Obviously, it does have a bit of a sort of a Chinese population, and there's that sort of like a correction from last time where the Chinese population were hating a lot on Scott Morrison, even though like Dutton's a massive China warhawk himself, but maybe they don't know that. But like Reid is a more progressive seat than some of the other seats in New South Wales. They voted yes for same-sex marriage. They even voted yes for the voice. And that's why I have here that Parramatta going to the coalition. Like the MRP polls have not pointed to Parramatta being in their too close to call category. I don't believe for any surveys, but it has been close. It's been like 52-48. Parramatta voted no for the voice, voted no for same-sex marriage. I guess the difference between that and Reid is Reid has a bit more of a sort of like an upper class population. It's a bit wealthier, but those are the kind of seats that are trending towards the left. They're not the kind of seats that Dutton is going after. I think Scott Morrison went after Parramatta and didn't get very far back in 2019. It does have similar demographics to Bennelong, quite maybe not as wealthy. But my sort of suggestion here is that either Reid or Parramatta will go to the coalition. They're right next to each other. Reid is on a larger margin than Parramatta. But yeah, that MRP just said that Reid was 50-50. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the story is about there. So Bradfield, I want to briefly talk about this. So I actually think that it is somewhat likely for Teal to win Bradfield. This is not the kind of seat that Dutton is really aiming for in his whole strategy, but at the same time, there might be those voters who they don't have an incumbent. Tink is not running, so they don't have someone that they already know and trust. And maybe they think, like, we want to give the coalition as many seats as possible so that the government isn't a complete shit show, like coalition of chaos. So maybe they'll say, okay, we'll vote for the Libs. I believe they scrapped Warren Mundine as a candidate. They picked some moderate. So maybe they'd be happy to vote for the Libs in Bradfield. So I think I'm pretty happy to give that to the coalition. I don't know if that's breaking my own rule. It's not technically a teal seat. I mean, it does contain a lot of North Sydney, but it's not technically a teal seat. But I think winning Bradfield will be key to the coalition getting majority. They don't have to. I don't think they have to win Bradfield to get a majority, but it will definitely help them. So the other seats that I want to talk about, and there's actually five of them. There's a lot. There's a lot that are sort of like sort of on shaky ground for the Labour Party, and I want to talk about. I mean, there's technically six actually, but we'll go over them. So the first one is Macarthur, which the most recent MRP gave a shock win to the coalition. It's like 52-48. They think the coalition is ahead in Macarthur. I mean, geographically, it looks like it's not that surprising. It's like wedged here between Hume and Hughes. You would think like the seat maybe might be sort of fertile ground for the coalition. Another one is up here on the Central Coast, Shortland and Dobell. Actually, the other way around, Shortland and Dobell. I've actually given Dobell here to the coalition, despite the fact that Shortland is on a smaller margin, just because it looks nicer, because it's close to Robertson here. Those are another two which are absolutely under threat. And then we have Werriwa here, which I don't think any of the MRPs are pointing to Labor in trouble here. The margin is a bit smaller than some of these other seats, I believe. And the A forecast site does point to this is the most likely, in its opinion, of, and that might just be down to margins, I don't really know why. The A forecast site thinks this is the most likely out of the ones I'm mentioning to go to the coalition. And then we have Macquarie, which was also quite close on the most recent MRP. I think it was 51-49. So we have a bunch of seats here. I believe that's 5 seats. Oh, and Eden Monaro too, which I don't think that's really in play, in my opinion, but the A forecast site thinks otherwise. But those 5 seats, and Eden Monaro is over here, by the way. Those 6 seats, actually, I believe that the coalition could quite possibly win 2 of them. I don't know which ones. I'm saying that the most likely at the moment will be Dobell and Macarthur. Macarthur because of that MRP. Dobell because it just looks like, because it's right next to Robertson, that it would go to the coalition. That's my only reasoning. Yeah, Dobell is maybe a bit of a stretch, but yeah, Macarthur, that's absolutely the kind of seat that Peter Dutton is targeting, that outer suburban seat, maybe some mortgage stress. Not a seat that you would expect to go to the coalition, but this is Peter Dutton's strategy, and with this sort of cost of living crisis, that's what makes things sort of interesting. Now, the one I did not mention here is Hunter. So I wouldn't have actually said this as one that's sort of possible, but their latest MRP did actually point to the coalition being ahead here, 51-49, and then in the MRP before that, it was too close to call. Scott Morrison did not win Hunter in 2019, which that was seen as, I think a lot of people expected that he would win that seat because sort of like the anti-green energy thing. But I think Joel Fitzgibbon was a member at the time, so he was seen as like pretty like pro like fossil fuels and stuff like that. So maybe that's why they were able to hang on. But Hunter, I'm going to give that one to the coalition, although the margin on that is kind of not that high. So I guess that's why you could say it might go to the coalition. Right, so moving on to probably the biggest state of consequence, and where we're seeing the biggest swings is Victoria. So the fabled News Poll Quarterly that I was going to do a video on that I didn't has Labor and the coalition on 50-50 in Victoria, which is quite interesting because Victoria is often seen, as, at least in sort of recent times, as sort of like the more left-wing state in the country, at least compared to like New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, maybe not SA and Tasmania, but it's definitely seen as a left-wing state. And for it to be 50-50, and Labor gets a lot of seats in Victoria, this is pointing to like a 5 or 6% swing. This is pointing to a big swing against the Labor Party. And it is not going to be uniform. There is going to be some seats where things swing a lot more. Let's talk about the sort of the no-brainer ones. So Chisholm, I believe the margin there is pretty small. Even though that's sort of like a more inner city seat, there might be some correction from last time against, the Chinese vote and stuff like that. That's likely to go to the coalition. McEwen up here, also a small margin. It's in that sort of target area, definitely a bit conservative. That's probably going to go to the coalition. Aston, Labor won another by-election, but it's probably going to flip back to the coalition. And then you have a bunch of other seats. Now, Bruce is a very interesting one. I made a video, I can't remember how long ago, it might have been like 6 months ago or something like that, where I basically said like, oh, Bruce, like it was like it was too close to call on the MRP. I was like, oh no, like that's just static. That's not happening. That's a safe Labor seat. Blah 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 blah. Things do not look like that anymore. Bruce is looking like it could be a solid gain for the coalition. I don't think it's really too much of an ask to suggest that Bruce could go to the coalition. So that's one in their column. But there's a bunch of other seats which are like could also swing that way too. The margins are not small, but they don't have to be small because, as I said, there's going to be a 5 or 6% swing in Victoria, and it's not all going to be uniform. Now, I do think a lot of the swing is going to be in places where Labor is pretty safe. So I think a lot of the swing is going to be in sort of like Western Victoria, up here in Cornwall and Scullin, places where Labor has a massive margin. They might get like a 10% swing, but they'll survive because their margin is just so big. And also places where, overwhelmingly rejected the voice. I might as well mention that Bruce not only rejected the voice, but also rejected same-sex marriage. But the places where coalition have a good chance are places like Hawke, out in the sort of far western suburbs, right next to McEwen. We have Dunkley here, which Labor did keep at a by-election, but things have gotten worse in the polls since that by-election. Now, usually by-elections, they swing more against the government than actually federal elections do, but I still think that Labor, since the by-election, which I think was early last year, they have lost a lot of shine even since that time. So that's why that could go to the coalition. It's the one that Forecast actually thinks is most likely to go to the coalition. The MRPs aren't really saying that. Another one is Holt, which is right next door to Dunkley. Another one is Corangamite, which the MRPs are saying are like too close to call. Out of these 4 sort of target seats, I think the coalition could quite possibly win 2 of them. I don't know which ones. I can't sort of predict how the swing is going to go. It could be like Corangamite and Hawke. It could be Hawke and Holt. It could be Holt and Dunkley. I don't really know, but they could go to the coalition. It is quite a big margin, and I'll get up the margins right now to get over. But we know there's going to be a big swing in Victoria. It just really depends like where exactly that swing is going to be. So let's look at sort of what we've done here. We've gotten rid of Bennelong. I might as well mention here that I'm taking that Monash and Clare, and as I said earlier, Moore revert back to the coalition. Gilmore gone. Menzies is just a notional Labor seat. They don't actually have it. Lyons is gone. Lingiari is gone. Robertson is gone. Patterson is gone. Tangney is gone. Boothby is safe, but I believe one of these 2 could go. Chisholm is gone. Bullwinkle is gone. Aston is gone. Parramatta is gone, either that or Reid. McEwen is gone. Hunter is gone. Blair is safe. Bruce is gone. And then out of Werriwa, Shortland, I guess Eden Monaro, Macquarie, Dobell, and if we go all the way down to MacArthur up here, out of these 6, I believe that I mentioned, all 6, 2 of them could go to the coalition. The swing is not on in New South Wales to the degree that it is in Victoria, but there is more seats in New South Wales. So 2 out of those 6 seats, but I don't think it's happening in Eden Monaro. And then we do have some quite large margins here. I believe this is the pre-by-election margin in Dunkley. The post-by-election margin is like 3% or something like this, but it's more appropriate than it's the pre-by-election margin because it's not like it's going to like swing twice that much. I don't, you know what I'm trying to say. So yeah, Dunkley, Holt, Hawke, Corangamite, two of them could go to the coalition, and the rest. I know. Like, so I recently got in contact with a guy you might have seen called Anglo Election Insights. We've been chatting for a little bit. He actually did videos. What I was gonna do, which was like sort of going more into depth of certain states and cities. I might end up doing those videos, but I'm glad he kind of did them because it saves me from having to do them. And honestly, I think his predictions are pretty correct. But we both don't know too much about Western Australia, and he was saying that, you know, Pierce is maybe on the table. I don't think it's on the table because the margin is just so high. And I don't think WA is where we're going to be seeing swings. WA has not been hit with the cost of living crisis to the same degree as Victoria. I believe that the state government has been giving them lots of goodies. I guess that's my theory. I think Albanese is going to be doing a lot to sort of shore up seats like Pierce, so I do not think that's going to go back to the coalition. But yeah, Macarthur, it does have quite a high margin, but I guess because it just has that sort of profile that Dutton um, is really attracting. I guess that's why in the most recent MRP, like it's actually got the coalition ahead. So that's a big swing that MRP is pointing to. That's like a 12% swing it's pointing to. Some of these seats, yeah, like Gorton, are going to get their margins completely knocked off. Like I think Gorton is going to go down from like a 10% margin to like a 3% margin or something like that. Same as like McMahon and Isaacs. I mean, Labor's going to get a lot of marginal seats in Victoria that they didn't have before, and they're going to lose a bunch of them too. So this is how, without winning back any of the teal seats, I believe that the coalition can get to the magic number of 76. There's of course more seats than this they could possibly win, but these are the most likely ones. And there are some seats which people are talking about that they could lose to, like Warren here. I don't think it's happening. Or Sturt. I don't think it's happening either. And of course Bradfield, which I think, you know, could have a chance, but for this scenario, we're just going to say it stays with the coalition. If we do want to give Bradfield to a teal, all we have to say is that the coalition will win 3 out of 6 seats in New South Wales of the ones I mentioned earlier, or 3 out of 4 seats in Victoria, what I mentioned earlier, which, as I said, because of the big swings against Labor, isn't completely out of the question. Look, I think things are particularly dire for Labor. I think things are going to get a bit better, but there's been some really shocking polls in Victoria. Not only that, News Talk Quarterly, there was a Result Strategic, which had their primary vote at like 25% federally and like statewide 22%. So like the state government is definitely dragging them down. But I think they've just been hit really hard by the cost of living crisis, more so than everyone else. So is this a likely scenario? No. I mean, I do say that things are going to get better for Labor, but I have been saying that for like about a year now, and that hasn't happened. Things have just gotten worse and worse. Labor almost certainly will be going back to Parliament next month. They're going to be doing a bunch of legislation that they didn't get done last year. Things like the Toral reform, they'll sort that out, and the gambling, and like the superannuation tax, a couple of other stuff. And I still stand by my prediction that I said late last month that the election will be on April 12th. A lot of people have echoed me. There was somebody in the comments who was saying like, oh, that's in the middle of the Victorian state holidays and the start of the New South Wales state holidays. The voters will crucify them. All these people want to go on holidays and they're stopping them. Dude, we have pre-polls for 2 weeks. That's the simple answer. People will go to pre-polls. Pre-polls are already enormously popular. Everybody knows about them. All the people who want to go on holidays will just go to pre-poll. And then if the election happens like during their holiday, they'll get an extra bonus if they want to like boot out the Labor Party, which is probably what's going to happen. The Labor Party are probably going to be booted out, definitely out of majority government, possibly out of government entirely. It really just depends on key factors like if the RBA actually does a interest rate cut next February, if that actually will appease voters at all. And then of course, if the RBA does another cut on April 1st, which they probably won't. I think if they do a cut next month, they're not going to bother doing one on April 1st. Oh, editor's note, I just want to say that if the RBA does not cut interest rates next month in February, I think it's likely that they actually could not be an April 12 election. The government might just go to a budget because they feel like they need to actually do something in the budget in order to satiate voters, because the obviously the interest rate cut isn't happening, and that's what they were looking forward to. And while we're here, I'm just going to look quickly at MacArthur, the one where we are suspecting is going to be a massive swing, despite the fact that the swing is not necessarily that on in New South Wales. It does have a significant amount of people who have mortgages compared to the rest of Australia, at least back in 2021. They probably have even more now. But that's the video, everyone. I again apologize for the slow upload schedule. Go check out Anglo Elections Insights for his videos, because he's doing the things that I said I would do that I haven't done. Also, go check out a live stream recording that I did with Sormon earlier this month, where we discussed a lot of things. We discussed things like nuclear, immigration, sort of Dutton's popularity, all kinds of stuff. I'll put a link to that in the description. It was like, I think about 90 minutes long or something like that. I will have to do a video on the WA election. A forecast only recently did a WA election forecast, so it's a perfect time for me to get on board with that thing. That election is only a couple of months away, so that will be the next video, everyone. But I hope you enjoyed hearing how I think Dutton could get a majority in the Lodge. Goodbye.